I'm Scott L. Miller. It is the 22nd of February, 2023. This is my vlog of daily life in Nicaragua. Today we're going to be talking about soup and currencies. All right, getting started today. I have a few new things to show you. One is my new cap. Something that I got for my birthday, which technically, now you know I'm filming this after my birthday, but I have this awesome new hat, and I've been wondering how this style of cap would work for me, a driver's cap, because I've never had one before, and I've never seen myself in one, but I wear hats all the time, and I was curious if this is something I should add to my hat repertoire, and this was given to me, thank you very much, at my birthday party, which I will also quickly show. This is kind of giving things away, because I'm filming this after it has happened, but we had the party here. On the day of the party, the new furniture arrived, but I'm going to show that early as well. Again, this is the Wednesday, the 22nd is what we're filming for, but this arrived on the 25th. This is our new chair that was made for us in Messiah. Very, very cool. And you can see the new hammock chair we have up, and we have the correct hanging stuff now. We didn't have this for a little while, so we had put it up, but now it is up properly. So trying a few new things out here, and I'm gonna sit back in the chair. This is gonna be interesting. Right now the sunlight is coming through really strong, so I can't turn too much while filming, but this is a little bit interesting. So today being Ash Wednesday on February 22nd here in Nicaragua, because Lent is taken relatively seriously, there is, much like there was in my childhood back home in New York, during Lent, it's very strictly observed that there is no meat on Fridays or on Ash Wednesday. And of course, when I was growing up, a lot of people also did no meat on Fridays. And of course, I'm vegetarian, so I do no meat ever, right? But it is growing up with this tradition, because Western New York did this so strongly, that my vegetarian leanings kind of got defined. So the whole ovo-lacto-pescatarian thing, as is done in Lent and by the church, is what was basically my vegetarian upbringing when I was young. I have to take a moment and stop the dog from tearing up the yard. All right, she's making a huge mess. Every time I'm out here and start talking, the dogs just go crazy and start tearing the yard apart. I don't know what it is. Now she's covered in mud and another hole in the yard that we have to figure out. I don't know how to stop dogs from digging, so if anybody has any ideas, love to hear it. Get down in those comments. Let me know. All right, so because of all this, because Lent is a big thing here, the Nicaraguan traditional food, and of course they do lots of things for Lent. They have fish, and they have, you know, yuca and just whatever. But the food of Lent, the big thing, is Sopa de Queso. This is a cheese soup, a vegetarian cheese soup. Specifically, you know it's going to be vegetarian because it's Lent. It's a religious thing. So these are seriously vegetarian. You don't have to really worry about that. And everybody does it. So if you're looking at Instagram today, of course you can't now by the time you're seeing this, but in a year, look at Instagram in Nicaragua. Every restaurant is posting their Sopa de Queso for Lent. Now, I wanted to film this, and I'm hoping I still am going to be able to, but today I did not get a chance to film, but because Paul was going out to La Antigua, which is part of El Sopan, which is the famous Leonese soup restaurant, I had him pick me up Sopa de Queso for dinner. So he picked that up and brought it home to me. So I don't have the whole presentation. I can't show you the restaurant or everything, but I got it. So this is El Sopan, is the soup restaurant. So it's the perfect place to get my first ever Sopa de Queso. And it was fantastic. Huge pieces of yuca. I didn't eat all the yuca. It was a lot of yuca, but the soup was really tasty. It's not so heavy in the cheese. It's more of a cheese thing going on, but it was really good. And then there's like these croquettes sort of things that I'm not quite sure what they're made out of. And you put them into the soup and let it soak up some of the soup, but they're real heavy, kind of like a cornmeal kind of thing. And so delicious. It was fantastic. And I can see why people get excited about eating at Lent. That's some really good food. I want to try it out at some places like Casa del Cafe, which does it. I want to try it out at El Vivero, which has been advertising it. And if somehow I managed to get into Managua, La Cocina de Aide is famous for doing the Sopa de Queso all throughout Managua. They're famous for that. So I'd really like to check theirs out and just see how Managua does it, maybe compare to Leon. But that's a big thing. So I'm really hoping to be able to show that to you, but it's a cool thing here for Lent, which has started today. All right. Today's topic is going to be currencies. Now, I know we talked about the comparing U.S. and Nicaraguan Cordoba currencies recently and talking about how you can use the ATM and all that. But since then, there's been a bit of talk, and I've had a few videos where we've been talking about or looking at the issues where they're talking about doing away with U.S. dollars in Nicaragua. And what does that mean? And what really surprises me is some people we're talking about, well, this is really going to impact things, all the things that they're worried about and such. And so I want to talk about that a bit because I think people have a really hard time, and I know this to be true, having worked in currencies on Wall Street, that lots and lots of people really don't understand what a currency is and therefore have a really different reaction to news about it than I think they should. So I want to cover some of this, but the quick takeaway before we really get into it is, trust me, the overall impact, if on the off chance that they actually follow through with this taking away the dollar thing, is incredibly minimal and will only have positive results for anybody, tourist or local or expat or whatever. There's no real downside, maybe some minor inconveniences, but that's all we're talking about. This is really not the big thing that people are making it out to be. So let's get to it. All right, so let's start with a quick story of what exactly a currency is, because that helps to explain things. In the early days, people had to barter for everything. That means the guy who raised sheep and the girl who baked bread, if he wanted to buy some bread or she wanted to get some sheep, they had to trade, and that was problematic because a sheep is worth a lot of loaves of bread, more than he could use at any given time. This means there was no really reasonable way for him to get bread from her, and she had to sell so much bread to get one sheep. And what was she going to do with an entire sheep all at once? Nobody won from this system. What they figured out pretty quickly is they needed a medium of exchange, and we don't know what they first used, beads, clams, who knows, but eventually most people settled on a pretty universal thing, which is precious metals, because they're easy to carry a lot of in value in a small amount of area and to mint into some useful way. So coinage became an early medium of exchange, particularly gold and silver and copper, things that were worth a lot of money and easy to work with. Over time, it became universal almost that these are the things we would use to represent the value of goods. A value in gold would be associated to a sheep, and a different value in gold would be associated with a loaf of bread. Then, when the person who was when he sold a sheep, he would get all the gold for the sheep at once, and he could buy the bread with it a little bit at a time, giving away the gold. And the girl making the bread could collect small amounts of gold from many different people on any given day as she sold many loaves of bread. This proved to be incredibly useful and empowered the entire concept of commerce. Over time, the idea of actually carrying highly valuable metals in your pockets became a little bit absurd. People realized that they were carrying a lot of things in their pockets, and there's a lot of cases where you needed to spend more than you could carry, and it's dangerous to carry it. That's how muggings happen. And so they started doing things like representing values of gold with paper, and they would have banks that would allow you to deposit gold, and you would get paper that said you had money on deposit. Eventually, this turned into currencies as we know them today, things like the US dollar that represent an amount of gold, whether directly, as in the old days, or loosely today, where it represents a theoretical amount of gold, but there's no actual gold to back it. So it's not what we call a gold-backed currency, but there was a time, and there are currencies that are backed by actual gold. The money in your hand represents actual gold on deposit somewhere. Originally, it was just gold, and it was just a proxy for real gold. Today, we have separated the need because of the massive universal banking and commerce systems. We don't actually have the need to back things with gold anymore. However, there is value to doing so. There's also value to not doing so. So both systems exist. Other systems exist as well. For example, Bitcoin is called a cryptocurrency, but it is actually an energy-backed currency. Now, We're not going to get into cryptocurrencies. We can talk about that. If that's something you want me to talk more about, I'm not going to talk about like the technology of how it works. But if you want to understand it as a currency, especially since El Salvador uses it as a currency, get down in the comments, let me know. Not today, but I can totally do that. Because a lot of people are like, oh, it's really confusing working with cryptocurrencies. And actually it shouldn't be. But another time. So we have these currencies and they're simply a way to pay for things. And US dollars are a certain amount of a sheep, 0.1% of a sheep. I have no idea what a sheep actually costs. We'll just assume it's $1,000. And that 0.1 sheep is one loaf of bread. Again, I don't know how much a loaf of bread is, but we'll say it's $1. So that's what we're looking at, 1,000 to 1. And by carrying dollars, you're able to buy whatever it is you want with that because everyone agrees that dollars have this value. When you go between currencies, you're not making anything weird. You're simply, remember, we just issued dollars. They don't represent anything specifically. The number value is arbitrary. So if we have dollars and someone else has some other currency that's worth 1/100th of a dollar, it would be equivalent of a penny. Maybe it's worth $100. Then you'd have to carry $100 for every one of that you're going to get. But it's a direct translation. If you got something, a bill that was, let's just call it the Norwegian peso, each one is, I don't know the actual stuff in Norway or its value. So each one you get is worth $100. If you're going to buy a sheep, you would need 10 of them, right? It doesn't change how much the sheep is worth. It changes how many numbers go on the bill, but the bill's value is directly translatable to the US dollar. If you were to have a job in the United States and get paid in US dollars, let's say you made $100,000 a year, they would have to pay you 100,000 US dollars. If you took that job and got paid in Norwegian pesos, each worth $100, you would make 1,000 Norwegian pesos in a year. It doesn't change how much you get paid. Your amount you get is the same. 100 sheeps, right? It doesn't matter. It's just a number. But a lot of people feel that currency with bigger value, so you get lower numbers, is worth more when they're spending it. They feel like they're getting more for it. And people, when they're getting paid, feel like that the bigger the number means they get more. So a lot of times you'll have people argue, I want to get paid in US dollars because they think that the bigger number is going to be better. But other people are like, but I want to shop in euros because they think that the lower number is going to be better. It doesn't matter. It just translates. Banks have a value, so they all equal out at the end of the day. So the idea that one currency is more valuable than another is worthless. Now, currencies do float, they do change. There's a lot of complicated things that happen behind the scenes, so exchange rates change over time. Some currencies are considered strong, some are considered weak, some change rapidly, some change slowly, some are easy to use, some are difficult to use. All of that is true, but fundamentally, at any given moment, currency is just a proxy for buying things, and you never need to worry about which one you're using as to how much something is worth. You only have to worry about if you have enough of them and if the price is good and if it's easy to get them or whatever. That's it. Using US dollars may be more or less convenient, but it's not changing how much something is. The value doesn't change. So when people are talking about, we're talking about maybe using or doing away with US dollars here in Nicaragua, let's start with what that means. Today, Nicaragua is on Cordoba only. It's already a single currency system, as most countries are. That is normal. Very few places have multiple currencies. It is simply that it is common, it is de facto to accept dollars in Nicaragua in addition to the Cordoba. But the way that the system works is you can go to your bank in the United States or your bank in Nicaragua, or go to the ATM, or go to anyone on the street, not anyone, but people who exchange money on the street, or to just wherever, and give them $1, and for every dollar you give them, they're going to give you 36.6 Cordoba, and for every 36.6 Cordoba you give them, they'll give you $1. You can go back and forth all day. Yes, technically they charge you a small fee for doing this, so you would lose money if you actually went back and forth all day, but you'd lose money regardless of which direction you went. It's not like you switch from one to the other and get richer. If that worked, everyone would do it. If dollars made you more money, you would simply trade all your Cordoba in for dollars and magically you'd have more money. That's not how it works, obviously, or everyone would do that. So using different currencies doesn't really change anything. The time that we worry about currencies is when they're our own currency, and that's why all of our money is being held in. But when we're traveling or living in a country, That's not really how it works. If you're here in Nicaragua, now if you're a Nicaraguan, you care about the overall health of the Cordoba because as it rises or falls, the entire economy goes up and down to some degree with it. The same as in the United States, we worry about how the US dollar does because if the dollar becomes more powerful, the entire economy grows. And as it weakens, the entire economy shrinks. But that is by small amounts on the dollar by dollar value, and it still trades against other currencies. You can just trade back and forth. What we're talking about in Nicaragua is not changing fundamentally how things work because the country only has one currency, just like the United States has one official currency, and then you can use others. If you had euros or Canadian dollars or Mexican pesos or Nicaraguan Cordoba, you can spend them in the United States freely. You can go to any business and offer to pay them in those currencies, and it is up to those businesses whether or not they feel like taking those currencies and handling the price adjustment for you. And sometimes they will give you a bad deal on that because you're making them put in this extra effort for your sake, and it's not really their job. You should be going to a bank. That's a different discussion. I'm going to try to find a spot with a little more shade because this is a tough spot to record. So that we already have that in the United States. So every day in the United States, you're dealing in this multi-currency system with only one currency being broadly accepted. That's the US dollar. But you can use anything. In Nicaragua, you have the same situation. You can use any currency you want. It's not like the US dollar is specifically called out as being available or allowed or anything of the sort. It's simply that many businesses are choosing to post their prices in US dollars. The problem with this is not that it makes things more expensive or cheaper. It does not. It simply means that the prices on the menu are 36.6 times lower than they should be, and you have to do the calculation in your head. That's it. It's the only thing. The reason that this is a problem is because it's confusing. It's hard for people to have to work with double currencies, and there are times that things get misprinted because of this. And quite often you will see things listed in one currency or the other with the wrong symbol with it. And so you'll see things from time to time that are like monthly rent, 200 Cordobas. And people are like, it says 200 Cordobas, you have to give me that deal. And they're like, we're not going to give you a place for whatever that is, $30, right? It's not going to happen, but that's how it's listed. It's probably way less than that, right? It's like $8, I think. It's a problem because when you're looking at certain things, you can't tell. Is this especially with like real estate, they'll list prices and say it's Cordoba, but they mean it's $1. And so what you're looking at and thinking is a monthly price is actually the sale price of a property or vice versa because everything's wrong. People are making mistakes everywhere because they just randomly put in things. It's a problem, whether it's inconvenient or just dumb. And of course you have the problem that maybe they didn't mean either. What's going to stop them from just saying, oh, I meant it was euros, right? They can do anything they want because no one's policing that you need to have legible, understandable currencies. In the United States, if you posted prices and then when someone went to pay, you said, sorry, I meant Canadian dollars, not US dollars, they'd be like, what are you doing? Like, no, obviously we both agreed to US dollars. That's how it works, right? That's basically what it's like. Imagine if you went and made a deal and decided to go eat at a restaurant in the United States and they changed the currency on you after you had eaten. Or imagine even if you hadn't had that problem, but you went to a restaurant and found all of your prices listed in Chinese yuan, right? Of course, you could pull out your calculator and go to xe.com and figure out what the exchange rate is and deal with all that and then pay in the same number of dollars it would have been. It's just really annoying, right? You would hate that and you'd be upset if that's the way the systems work, that every restaurant could just post any currency they wanted on everything. Of course, legally, I think they can in the United States, but no one does. Never. I've never seen prices in an alternative currency, not even as an option, let alone as the only thing posted. But here in Nicaragua, there are an awful lot of places that, because it's considered cool or pretentious or premium, sometimes they make the prices want to look smaller. They'll post them in US dollars. And it makes it kind of easy for tourists who think in dollars. But for the locals, they're like, I don't know what that money is. I have to multiply everything times 36.6 and easily get it wrong. And it's easy to look at the menu real quick and be like, $3 for dessert. That's not bad, but it's actually kind of high, right? And it throws you off. And so they're using it to mislead. They're using it for marketing purposes. And it makes things hard, just like it would in the United States. What they're talking about, maybe what the rumor is, let's start there. It's only a rumor. And what that rumor is that maybe at some point in the future, they're going to start enforcing the existing laws that say that all prices locally have to be in Cordoba. the local currency. They're not saying you can't, to the best of my knowledge, they're not saying you can't accept dollars. They're not saying you can't spend dollars. They're not saying they're going to change the dual ATM system where you have dollars or Cordoba from the ATMs. They're not changing the banking system where you have bank accounts in dollars or Cordobas. They're just saying when you list prices here, you have to list them in Cordoba. You do business in Cordoba. You can't try to do business outside of the Cordoba system. That is our local currency. Is it really causes a lot of overhead, a lot of expense, a lot of unnecessary problems because there are so many tourists who think that working in dollars is somehow to their advantage. That's part of the problem. A lot of this is people who are just confused and they think somehow working in dollars is either good or bad, and they do weird things because of it. Not because they're trying to get away with something, because they're just confused. Currencies are hard and people make weird mistakes. That's important to phase out. That's not helping anybody, right? Sometimes you have to make laws just to help people help themselves, and currencies are one of them. So that's really what's going on. They're trying to make the system make more sense, be more sensible. You can always go to the ATM and just take out money. It doesn't matter what bank account you have. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. You can take out dollars or Cordoba regardless of the source currency in your account. If you're coming from Canada, if you're coming from Europe, you have Canadian dollars, euros. You're coming from Japan, you have yen. You get here, you pop your ATM card in, and you get a choice. Dollars or Cordoba, take the one that makes sense for you. What they're trying to do is make it always make sense to use Cordoba. It just shouldn't make sense to use dollars, and it doesn't here. But so many people do it for whatever reason that it creates all this overhead and people get confused and they just keep doing it. So I think it's really a good thing. I don't think it's going to happen, but I do think it is generally a good thing that they are looking to phase out dollars as much as possible, because it just makes everything harder unnecessarily, adds to confusion, and especially if you're working with like street vendors who have no idea beyond just, oh, I was told 36 to the dollar, and they're trying to figure out the math. And they're just, poor people selling corn on the street side. They shouldn't have to be doing banking jobs for the banks, for the people. They should not be the money exchangers, right? But they need to sell that corn, so they're going to do whatever they can, and it's putting a lot of onerous work onto people who should not have to do it. That's for the banks. Make the banks do it. The people who want to bring in dollars, make them deal with it. Fine, no problem. Do that. Don't put it on the everyday people. Don't make the people reading menus be confused. Keep it simple like the rest of the world does. And I think it'll be a really good thing. So this brings up the question, if dollars in Cordoba or any currency like that can just be exchanged back and forth, why do some countries bother having their own currency when countries like El Salvador and Panama and Ecuador don't bother having their own currencies? They just use the US dollar. That seems to work really well for them, right? Why not do that? Well, why does any country have their own currency? Why do we not have a single universal currency? That's a great question. The simple answer is central banking. So we've covered why Nicaragua changing if they accept dollars or allow you to print dollars or whatever isn't a thing. By the way, I need to mention, I'm a business owner here and we have not been advised as to this situation. So that tends to make me think it is purely a rumor. If they wanted us to stop taking dollars, they would just let us know. They would start with, hey, can you guys not take dollars, please? And a lot of places wouldn't. And if that was a problem, then they would say, hey, we're going to stop taking dollars. Here's the date. Don't do it. Right? And we would know about it. They're not going to surprise us with, oh, there's a law that we didn't tell you was coming and you can't take dollars anymore, surprise. No, they're not going to do that, right? They would have told us already. So I don't find it very likely at all that that is something they're planning to do. But just in case they do, it's not a big deal. So, but why? Why do they continue to have Cordoba? Why? They could just use dollars. Wouldn't that be simpler? They wouldn't have to print their own money. They wouldn't have to keep track of it. They wouldn't have to have these discussions. No one would have to think about anything. They could just use all the same pricing guides as the United States. Central banking is key. And the reason that most countries, almost all countries, have their own central banks and issue their own currency is that it allows them to control the value of their currency relative to other currencies around the world. For example, if you use the dollar and nothing else, like Ecuador, and the United States experiences inflation, you will experience inflation as well. You may experience it somewhat differently to the United States, but you will experience it. You'll have a bunch of problems that your currency is changing on the international stage And how that affects you internally could be really dramatic, and you don't have any way to work against that. But if instead you issue your own currency and you have your own bank that controls that, you have some control vis-a-vis how it handles against the dollar. You could do what some countries do and lock it to the dollar, at least temporarily, and forcibly allow an exchange directly against the dollar and ride any inflation that goes with a larger currency. The US dollar and the euro being some of the world's most popular currencies to do this against, and lots of places lock against the dollar, and Nicaragua has done that in the past. They didn't do a straight lock, they did what was called a creeping peg, but it's similar, and we'll talk about that some other time. But that means that you can say, oh, this currency is really stable. We're going to guarantee an exchange against it through our central bank. And that means your inflation is going to tie to that country. You don't have to worry about it. But your fortunes are tied to theirs. If they start inflating crazy, you're going to inflate too. That's where Ecuador is today. That's where El Salvador is today. That's where Panama is. If you have your own currency, say the euro, and the dollar starts getting really, really strong, the euro doesn't necessarily need to change, but it'll change against the dollar. It'll get weaker against the dollar. And so when you go to buy dollars, you won't get as many of them. That sounds like a bad thing when that's how you're looking at it, but that can be a hedge against inflation. That is how the inflation systems happen, is these currencies becoming worth less and less over time versus more and more. You want to be able to do things to control that. And some of the ways that governments can do that is by pulling money off the market, by printing money and putting more onto the market. We all know that when you print money, you generally create inflation. Sometimes you're deflating so much that you don't offset that, but that's really, really, really rare. Generally, you make new money, you cause some amount of inflation, but you get new money that the government controls out of it. It can be a good thing at times. You can also destroy money. You can have central bank pull in money off the market as it moves through the government and simply have less money overall in the system, and that can fight inflation. At some point, it can actually cause deflation, but it's hard to do because you got to somehow absorb that money. You can't just steal it from people or they get upset. So it's complicated, but central banking gives all these tools to make more money, reduce money, peg it to different systems, hold currencies in different currencies in house. So it's common. For example, if Nicaragua wanted to issue more Cordoba, what they may do is use that new Cordoba to buy euros or to buy dollars, and thereby hold those in a bank account so that they actually have US dollar backed Cordoba or euro backed Cordoba. Those types of things are real, and countries do this all the time. They keep cash reserves of foreign capital so that they can use it as a way to buy their own currencies off the market using foreign currencies. So for example, if the Cordoba was to fall or to rise dramatically, and say right now it's worth 36.6 to the dollar, but what if it became really powerful and was only worth 30 to the dollar? We would rapidly risk all kinds of instability in the country as the currency started fluctuating. Well, the bank can use that Cordoba to purchase US dollars with that, taking their own Cordoba off the market, purchase it, and adjust the market that way. And then if the Cordoba gets really weak, they can start selling it or whatever. They have these tools at their disposal, or vice versa, right? There's all different ways that they can do it in order to control the currencies. And that's a really important tool, and countries all over the world do this for that reason. That's why having your own central bank and having your own currency that your government controls on its own are critical. Now you may say, why would anyone ever want a weaker currency? You obviously just want a stronger and stronger currency. That is not the case. As currencies become relatively stronger, meaning they're worth more, like they're like a bubble, yes, you get more buying power. So as the US dollar increases in value relative to the rest of the world, it means Americans can travel abroad and their money goes farther. That is true. But it also means that nobody wants to buy things from the US because the cost of making things in the US goes up. So you start to lose jobs, you start to lose manufacturing, you start to send jobs overseas, until it reverses and somewhere else's currencies come up and adjust the US back down. Currencies will over time generally self-adjust. Like anything, they're just an exchange media. They are not an investment vehicle. They don't become worth more money over time. It's not like a stock, which actually generates some good. When people say put your money to work for you, they mean in buying stocks and bonds and other things like that that actually generate revenue. Currency does not do that. It is an exchange medium only. You cannot invest in it. You can hold it, but you are investing as part of a trade. It is a trade transaction that you are simply holding because you are betting against the long-term trade dynamics. You're not actually investing. It can be a way to make money. That doesn't mean you can't. trading is a valid way to make money, but you're making money on the activity of trading, not on the value of the increase of quality of goods that you are investing in making. I know it gets complicated, but it's important to understand in these contexts. So that is why currencies do what they do. That is why we have central banks. That is why Nicaragua has its own currency, and why it's not a big deal whether they keep the US dollar on the market or take it off of the market. We just don't care, right? It's not going to affect anybody day to day. It's not going to affect the prices on the ground because all of the prices in Nicaragua are backed by Cordoba. The cost of corn on the street corner is, if it's 36.6 Cordoba, then it's worth $1. If you walked around and sneakily ripped off the signs that say 36 Cordoba and slapped a $1 sign up there, it's not going to make the price of the actual value of the corn change. It's still worth $1. It's still worth 36.6 Cordoba. It doesn't matter which one you write. One equals the other, right? X equals Y. You can write X or Y in any spot, and the value is the same. Eventually, over time, one of them may shift, but then everything else shifts along with it. Right? If the price goes up in Cordoba, it will go up in dollars as well. They track together. They convert back and forth. So you never have to worry about that. What you have to worry about is the inconvenience of figuring it out, of carrying the dollars around, of whatever. Ideally, we want to go to all Cordoba. Trust me, it makes everyone's lives easier. It is why everyone in the world does this, right? You don't hear this problem of people saying, oh no, they're going to do away with the dollar anywhere else in the world. That's because they don't have the dollar at all. Right? So this was, in theory, a very small benefit that Nicaragua kind of allowed to a lot of tourists coming from the United States to operate on US dollars because they felt it was some kind of convenience for people who were here for just a day or two. It's not really that big of a convenience with modern ATMs and stuff. It makes no sense whatsoever. And because of the essentially pegged currency, it's not like it's floating up and down, so there's no value to that either. Simply doesn't make sense. But a lot of people use this, as they often do, to create panic, to create fear. Oh no, they're going to take away the dollar. Some mythical bad thing is going to happen because it sounds scary. They're taking away the US dollar. No, Canada doesn't take the US dollar. England doesn't take the US dollar. Germany doesn't take the US dollar. South Africa doesn't take it. Namibia doesn't take it. Colombia doesn't take it. Right? Guatemala doesn't take it. Costa Rica doesn't take it. We're not complaining about how terrible things are there because they don't take it. We're not saying some tragedy has befallen anyone. We're not saying that we should be scared of going to those countries because they don't take the US dollar anymore, right? It's not like that. Why would we care that Nicaragua is simply joining everybody else in standard banking, right? We don't. It just doesn't work that way. So it's not a bad thing at all. It may not be a good thing. It may not matter at all. It's so irrelevant that it's really hard to picture anybody being upset, except for restaurants who have to print new menus. And then the printers are like, yes, more menu printing. That's about it. They're the only ones who are affected. Nobody cares. Thanks for joining me. Please remember to like and subscribe. If you have any questions, get down there in the comments. I answer just about everything. So get down there and let's talk about it. If you'd like to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ScottAllenMiller. Whether you are buying me a $5 coffee or you're doing that in Cordoba, which is whatever 5 times 36.6 is, I'm not going to do that in my head at this moment. I appreciate it very much, and it's all the same value, right? At the end of the day, whether you give me an American or Cordoba, I'm going to be drinking Cordoba-based coffee. So, and if you could really help out by posting this on social media, wherever, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, share it in your travel group, send it to your friends, tell your parents, tell your kids, sit down, have coffee, join me in the morning, and I will see all of you tomorrow.